So, welcome to episode 2 of the translation of the shoot 'em up made originally in Python Pygame from Kids Can Code website, and we're now doing, as was described in the original version here, some enemy sprites. I would encourage you to look this up first and follow it through. It's only 10 minutes. It's a great video as an introduction. And we'll now look at how to do this in Lua. So what we're doing this time, if I just hit the play button to show you and drag that across, is we've now got our green rectangle which we can still move from side to side using the left and right arrow keys or the A and D keys, but we're being attacked by swarms of vicious red rectangles which are dropping at different speeds and at different angles. At the moment there's no collision detection. These are just getting the graphics going. So let's close that off and we'll get into it. Now again, the code is available on my GitHub page. Let me just find that for you. So this was the original page for the original version by Kids Can Code, and here's my GitHub page. So this is the episode 2 where we're adding mobs both in Love2D, Monogame and Pygame. So this is the one we'll be looking at today. We've got the config.lua as we had before, and main, player and shared. We've now added a mob Lua, so we'll now look at the code that's involved. So let's start with mob. Now this time we want to make multiple mobs, so we need to have a genuine class that we can create. So we need to have a genuine class that we can create mobs from. So here we have to add a new section. So you'll see up here I've got a folder called lib, and if I click the button there, we've got 2 more files within lib, and so these are used to make the classes with. So the original one, if I double click class.lua, this is not my code. This came from a website, I believe. Let me just pause for a second. Okay, yes, it's from Pixelbyte Studios, Recursor, and he has an excellent Love2D playlist, which I thoroughly recommend you look at, and I've got the code from that site. So that's the generic kind of class code. So Lua is not officially an OOP language, but some clever people have done some clever stuff with metatables so that you can use it as a proper OOP language. So as I say, I didn't write this. I don't really fully understand how it works, but I simply use it, so we'll be using this class in our files. So if we go back to the mob, which is what we're going to be creating as our rectangles, you'll see that we are using a local class equals require lib class. So similar to Python's import, we're importing this class here in order to allow us to use this as a genuine class from which we can create objects. Now the basic kind of workaround with this one is this function here, which I will just increase the font size here. This acts like a constructor using, as you can see, there's a colon, mob colon new here, and we're passing it width height, and this will create a class called mob in exactly the same way as you'd expect it to work on both Python and C#. We have to use the self constructor thing the same as you would in Python, so that it once the object is created, it refers to itself when it's trying to find out what various values and so on are. So I have no intention of trying to show you how all this works. It just does. So you can find this sort of stuff when you look it up, but this is just showing you how to use it in Love2D. So we're creating using the kind of new concept here whenever we make a new mob, and it runs through all of the code here, but it's all set in a table again. So this is how this works. So what we're doing is we're creating our mob here as a deriving from the original class. We're calling it mob and then returning it at the end here. So when we call this, we are calling this file, which in turn calls this file, the class file here. So it kind of escalates down between one file and the other. So it's inheriting class, and then from here we can actually create our own subclasses from here if we so wished, but we don't get into that in this game. It's kept relatively simple, but it is a very powerful concept that we're using here. So if we go back to main, and we need to obviously make some changes in main to deal with the fact that we've now got to create these mobs. Now the first major change is that we've introduced two more variables into the original main file. We had originally shared and player. Now we've got mob and a mob list, which is just an empty table. We've still got the process events function that's remained unchanged. Then we've put in a new function here, which we'll come back to, which is to deal with collisions. So that at the moment we're not using, but it's there ready for use when we want to. Then we've got, as we had before, the love.load, where again we're checking to see whether we're running in debug mode. We've got the printout if we're doing anything different, but the main changes here is from this line onwards. So we're using mob equals require mob to import the mob class, and we're now going to make 8 of them by using a simple for loop. So we're going to run this 8 times. Remember what I said before, that in Lua you start with an index of 1, not 0. So we're using 1 to 8 to create 8 mobs. And the way this works is that we have created an empty table called mob list here. And we're going to use table insert, which means that we're going to add to that mob list table. And what we're going to add is a new mob object. So we're calling mob, passing in the values 30 and 40. So we're going to create 8 mobs, each of which has a size of 30 by 40. So if we have a look at mob and see how that passes through. So this is our constructor, which is the same as Python's double underscore in its double underscore, where you would pass in the values there. And we're making a rectangle of this size and shape. Now this time, instead of using, as we did on the first one, we made our own kind of rectangle table and then filled it in. We're actually going to use a rectangle object, which is also in the lib class here. So if I show you the rectangle, so this again is using the same class file that we had here. We're importing that and we're making a rectangle class from it. So you can see that this class file here is very much a generic base class, and we're now creating from it a rectangle class by deriving rectangle from it. There's some comments here to show you how it works. But basically, we're going to create a new rectangle with an x, y, width, and height. So this is the constructor. And so if we pass in the 4 values, the x and y coordinates, the width and the height, we can then create a rectangle, and also we can calculate from it the center of that rectangle and then set some properties up. So what this will do is when you create the new rectangle, it'll kind of set it all up down here, and then it'll jump to this set properties, which is down here, and that will also set the top, left, bottom, right, center x and center y properties, so that you get a lot of stuff in this rectangle class that you can make use of. So you've got not just its x and y and its width and height, but also its top, left, bottom, right side, center x and center y. So it's quite useful, and you get that using this rectangle get rect, which will return all those values, which can be quite useful. You can also get the center. I've also done it in both US and UK spelling, so you've got the correct English version here and you've got the American version here to get exactly the same data, which is the center of the rectangle. You can also set the x and y values. You can update them, and you can update its position. So it's got a few little functions and useful things that you can get from the rectangle class. So I won't go into great detail on how that all works, but it just shows you what you can do on a non-OOP language. So let's go back to our mob. So basically what we're saying here is create a rectangle by using the rectangle class and giving it the x, y, width and height values, and then set its the properties of this mob. And so what we're doing now is we're setting the rectangle x, y coordinates using some random figures, just to give it some variation, so that we want to create the rectangles off screen. In other words, we're in a minus y value, so it's at the top of the screen. So we've got a random value between minus 150 and minus 100. We've got a speed for the y direction, which is the up and down direction, and a speed for the x direction, which is across left to right. So we can play with these to alter them if you wish. Now I've also put in here that we can now start to introduce the idea of having it running in kind of 2 modes. So you've got a debug mode or a not, where it's either true or false, depending whether you're doing this to play the game or whether you're developing it. And the debug mode will do something, as you can see in here, it's reducing the speed from the amount that was set up here down quite considerably smaller, so that you've got more time to kind of play around and see whether it works. So again, it's got an update and a draw function where we can move the mob. We can change its position, or we can, and of course we can draw it by using this filled rectangle. So if we just go back to the main class, so at this stage we're just simply creating 8 rectangles. They're all of the same size, but they will appear in different positions above the top of the screen, so where that's invisible. Again, we're setting the game state to play. This one at the moment, shared debug, has very little effect. Actually, it's not quite true because we have set a slower speed. So what we can do if I just play that again with this kind of unset, we'll press the play button, just bring that across on my other screen, so you can see the speeds reasonably fast there. What we'll do is we'll untick that and we'll set debug to true. Okay, and let's rerun it, and we'll bring that across again. Yes, you can see that the rectangles are definitely falling at a much slower speed. This will allow you to debug a bit more easily, so actually it is worth leaving that on. Now you can see that this one is kind of going really slowly, and it's going to hit the side of the screen long before it comes down here. So it might be worth changing, if we shut that off, if we go back to the mob class, we're now running at these speeds because we're running in debug mode, but I'm thinking that the speed X, which is the speed it's running left and right, might be a bit high. So if we make that, say, minus 50 to plus 50, and we'll run that again. Actually, no, sorry, I've just realised we were already on. Let's just Control Z that. It was this one we wanted to change, so if we change that from minus 10 in debug mode to 10, and then we'll run it again. There we go. Yes, we've got less deviation from left to right now, so I think that works better. Yep, that's great. So we've altered that. So that's how you can make changes to each of those mobs as they are produced. Now the next thing we've done, obviously we've created them here, is to make sure that when the updates and draw is running, in the update one, I've now written a new function so that we're not just checking, as we were before, the position of the player. We're updating the player. I've written a new function here, which is this one. So what this one does is it first of all updates the player. So instead of that being called directly down here now, it's doing that and the mobs. So it's updating the player, and then it's going through the mob list and updating each one of those. I've done it backwards here for a reason which we'll go into at a later date. So we're starting our for loop. If I can just increase the font here. So we're starting off I at the length of the mob list. The hash sign in Lua is used as a len, or length, or that gets the length of the list. So length of the list, then dropping down to 1 with a step of -1, so that we're kind of going backwards through the list of mobs. The reason for doing that will become apparent later when we get to start destroying or moving them, but for the moment just accept that we're kind of going backwards. So we're updating each mob as we go through, and the player, so that's being done here. And then finally, when it gets to the draw, we're drawing the player as we did before. Then we're changing the colour of the graphics from green to red. If you remember on the player, let's get the player up, we were changing the colour to green. So now in main we're changing it to red, and then again we're going through the mob list. This time we're doing it the right way round, so we're starting I at 1 and going up to the length of mobs and drawing each one in turn. So that draws each of the mobs. So let's see if there's anything else we need to go through. Don't think we need to do that. Let's have a look. The player is pretty much the same as it was before. No changes have been made to that. So it's only really adding this mob class and some minor changes to the main.lure. Actually, I did make some changes to player. What I've done, again, just increase the font. I've used the rectangle again. So we've used this rectangle class, and we've changed the player to now use a rectangle object here. So the player rectangle, instead of it as it was before being a table, we're now making the player's rectangle again from the rectangle class, so that we're giving it, it works exactly the same way. It's just that as we've already created the rectangle class, we might as well make use of it. And then again, we're updating it depending on the keys that are pressed, left or right, and then the position of the rectangle, and then drawing it down here. So that remains pretty much the same. It's just that the rectangle itself is now we're now using a rectangle class to create that rectangle. So let's go back to main. Now the other thing which I could have implemented here is the kind of the mob player collisions. As you can see, I put it here as a to do to check the collisions with the player, but we'll do that next time round, I think, on the next video, because I'm trying to follow as much as I can what was done on the original one, where he didn't at this stage introduce collisions. So that will be done next time round. So hopefully that's fairly clear as to what's going on here. So there's quite a lot involved. We've added 2 library files here, and then we're using those to create a real class called mob, from which we are making objects, which are sort of basically rectangle objects, and running those through. So I'll just click that play key for you once more, and there it is. So I think that's improvement to the figures there has helped. It's stopping them from flying off the screen at too far an angle, so that is quite useful. Okay, so that's basically the differences with now adding our mobs, and next time round we'll add bullets and collisions, so it starts to get more serious, but still only using rectangles. We'll introduce graphics at a later date. As I say, we are following the series there. Okay.